Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our remote meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. I am Councillor Lucy Hovels and I'll be chairing this panel today. Please note this meeting is being broadcast live to the Council's website and will be available to be viewed up to 6 months. I would like to give you a very warm welcome to members, officers and members of the public or media who are watching this live feed this morning. Before I commence with the formal business on the agenda, I would like to cover some of the housekeeping rules for us to follow in order for the meeting to run very smoothly. For those participating in the meeting, if you could please only speak when invited to speak by myself as chair. Keep your microphone on mute at all times unless invited to speak. If you wish to speak, please type RTS in the chat function and that will indicate to me that you wish to speak. Please bear in mind that all participants can see the messages in the chat function. Once invited to speak, please introduce yourself and your name and position, unless you have already introduced yourself earlier in the meeting. If I lose connection, please note that Councillor Brian Jones, the Vice Chair of this committee, will take over, and in Councillor Jones' absence, Councillor David Boyswell. And then I'll move straight on to the meeting. Apologies for absence. Can I ask Ian Croft if there's any apologies, please?
Yes, Councillor Hovels, we have apologies from Councillors Simmons and from Nick Cook.
Thank you. We note those apologies. We move on to item 2, which is substitute members. Ian again.
Yes, Chair, we have Councillor Liz Brown substituting for Councillor Simmons.
Thank you. Moves us on to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting, which was held the 15th of June. Is there any matters arising from their minutes? I haven't been indicated, so are we happy to agree those minutes? Thank you, and it takes us on to item 4, which is declarations of interest. Does any member have any declarations of interest? There's been no declarations declared for this meeting. Moves us straight on to item 5, which is the media report. And can I ask the report to be introduced, please, from, is it James that's doing this morning? Sorry.
That's me, Lucy.
Sorry?
It's
Steve.
me, Lucy. Yeah.
Steve. Can't see you, Steve.
Great
So
stuff.
I hand over to you, Steve, to introduce this media report, please, and give us an update.
Derek is just waving. I don't know if you wanted to say
sorry.
something, Lucy.
Chair, just before we move to this item, I did get an email this morning about the meeting that we held on the 12th of March. Minutes of that meeting from Ian. Should they be confirmed this morning, or am I getting something wrong?
Ian, do we have 2 sets of minutes to agree? Sorry.
Yes, Chair, the papers were actually already published following the briefing meeting the other day, and we have the minutes from the 12th of March to be approved as well.
Okay, I'll take back a step then, and can I ask the panel to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of March? If we could formally agree those minutes. Thank you. Moves us on to Steve, and welcome, Steve. If you could now take us through the media report, Steve.
Yes, good morning, one and all, and accepting that we had the extraordinary panel meeting in relation to Sharon's appointment. Blimey, 12th of March is the last time that I formally really spoke to you all, but nonetheless, it's nice to see you all looking fit and healthy and with various glorious backgrounds. For some reason, my Teams doesn't give me backgrounds. I don't know why. So you've got my office at home. Anyway, good to see you all. So yes, needless to say, because this is the first police and crime panel meeting since March, effectively, there's been a lot of activity in the office and a lot of media activity. The report speaks for itself. there was just a couple of things that I was going to briefly mention. This isn't done in a particularly sort of linear order, but the Safer Streets funding that you'll see in section 2 was a really excellent piece of work in relation to the funding that we managed to get for the force area of Durham, which obviously includes Darlington as well. And in fact, we really did punch above our weight in terms of the amount of funding that we had relative to the size of the force. We got some very good media attention in relation to that, which I'm glad about. You will see that there was a significant amount of interest during towards the end of May in relation to Mr. Cummings, which put a fair amount of pressure on the office, but I think we handled it in an appropriate and professional manner. Moving on to social media activity, I mean, during this period of uncertainty across the country, and indeed what has been significantly challenging in terms of engagement, social media activity becomes even more important, really, I think. And it's not a league table, but you'll see on there we're 6th highest amongst Twitter followers amongst PCCs, which again, given the size of our force, I think is really, really excellent. Clearly, I want us to be at the top of that, and we'll continue to work on it, but people are nipping at our heels in terms of realizing the power of social media. Facebook, we've got the 2nd highest numbers of followers for PCCs around the country. Again, I think that is testament to the work that my media team does, and the interest that we've attracted, which is excellent. And again, the Instagram account, which is quite novel, still quite new, is doing quite nicely as well. It goes into a bit of detail there. Not surprisingly, the visit by Mr. Cummings got a significant number of looks, and there's a few more details there. My columns that I've continued to write in various local press and media. In fact, I finished the latest one yesterday. It's an interesting one, actually, writing columns for local press. I'll just mention, because of course I finished the columns several days, if not a week, before publication, and this fast-moving agenda of public health emergency means that quite often, by the time my column is published, everything has changed. I learned my lesson last time, but it just shows you the pace of change that we're having to cope with at the moment. And there you see that we've had some good coverage in Darlington as well. Happy to discuss any detail, or if you have any questions. This doesn't cover every single bit of media that we've done, but just gives you a flavour of the amount of work that we've been doing. One thing that I would point out is that Sarah Harris, who led our media team, got a new role outside of the organisation and left us in August. We've just appointed a new member of staff to the media team, but I just want to say thank you to Simon and Vicky from my office, who have sort of continued to provide really good output for the office during a time of increased importance, increased demand, and decreased resource. So thank you to them, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I open it up for questions from the panel.
Councillor Hovels, you're on mute.
Can I just say that Sarah Harris had been with the Commissioner's office for quite a long time. In fact, I think she was around in the old police authority days, so we certainly know of Sarah, and we would just like to put on record our thanks for all the work she undertook within her role, and wish her the very best in her new position, and also endorse what you said in terms of the people who have got hold of the baton and taken the work forward. So we would acknowledge that. Ian, Councillor Quinn. Sorry. Have I lost you, Ian?
No, Chair, I was just indicating that Councillor Quinn wishes to speak.
Okay, Councillor Quinn.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's not about the report that's just been given, but when you've been talking about the media, reports and what have you, on Facebook and such like, has there been an increase on reports on fireworks? Because we're getting inundated with calls about the fireworks and the problems that it's causing.
Steve?
I'm not aware. I suspect that things may ramp up now we're in the autumn season, but I'm not aware of any significant increase in terms of comments around fireworks at the moment.
Problem in certain communities. It was raised last night at a AAP board meeting, Steve, at the Durham area, which was highlighted. So I'll just share that with you. But that's the only conversations that I've heard of. But obviously we enter October and it's the usual thing. I think the fire brigade's leading on a campaign, and there are some contacts. I'm sure Steve will be able to share them contacts maybe with the members so they can go to them direct. And I'm sure that's within Dalton and County Durham.
Yeah, just
okay.
worth pointing out, whilst that issue of fireworks has been raised, I mean, the issue of antisocial behaviour this time of year in the run-up to Halloween, on Halloween, and then we have the 5th of November. Halloween traditionally is the single most busiest demand of most police forces across the country. It's more than Christmas Eve, it's more than New Year's Eve, it's more than summer bank holidays. It will be interesting and curious to see how, with the existing restrictions, assuming that they stay as they are, what the demand level will be on the service. But of course, now that we're back to pre-COVID demand levels from a policing perspective, it's just worth bearing in mind in terms of what is that going to look like and what the demand is going to be on the force. It's going to be interesting to see.
Sharon, you've indicated, Sharon from the Commissioner's Office. Did you want to contribute, Sharon?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So just to confirm what Steve has said there, no, we haven't seen a great deal of influx of complaints in relation to fireworks at the moment. So potentially there is a bit of a lag there in terms of people making contact with our office. But as it stands, that doesn't form part of much of the correspondence and issues that are being raised with our office at the present time.
Thank you, Sharon. Okay, no other questions. Are we happy to note the report and go to item 6, which is the Police and Crime Victim Commissioner's Annual Report? Steve?
Thanks very much, Chair. Ordinarily, I would have presented this annual report to you much sooner than today, but for obvious reasons in terms of the ability of the panel to convene, that wasn't possible. I did, however, take the decision, essentially the annual report is a public-facing document. It's important for people to know what we've been up to. And so I did take the decision to publish it on the website before presenting it to the panel. But I think that was the right thing to do. As you'll see, we've improved on the format, the new format that we introduced last year, to make it much more succinct, because it's certainly my view that people are more likely to read a short document than a long one. So we've provided headlines in that annual report as we did last year, and the start of the report, as you might expect, talks about Ron and his sad passing, but of course it is a retrospective report, so every time that I've looked at this recently, it sort of makes you realise how far we've come and what a lot has happened over the past, well, more than 12 months now, 18 months. as it has been, and the pressures that there's been on the service, and perhaps more importantly, the ability of the service and indeed my office to respond to that. A couple of highlights that I wanted to just raise, in particular the Goldstein Award that was presented over in the States in relation to the checkpoint scheme, which has now become business as usual in the force. That's a real success story. One of the things I was going to point you to is the vox pops, if you like, the comments and quotes at the end of the report by some people who have gone through the checkpoint scheme. I think it's very, very impactful. It's excellent for it to have been recognised internationally at that level, again demonstrating that Durham as a force and the office is really punching above its weight in terms of recognition and innovation. On page 2, appendix 2 of the report, you'll see on the right hand side there's some pictures of some books, resources for victims of crime. This is another interesting one in terms of international recognition, because those books that we commissioned and was produced has now been recognised all over the world, including New Zealand, I heard recently. So that's nice to know that, again, the influence of Durham knows no bounds from international boundaries. The force continues to do well in relation to the Uplift programme. Again, this is retrospective. A huge amount of work has gone on by the force to make sure that we meet our targets around the increased officer numbers. That's not to say that it's without its issues. Perhaps I'll talk a little bit more about that later in terms of we still, whilst we've had assurances that there will be funding for years 2 and 3 of the Uplift, we haven't actually had it, formally announced. So I'm not saying that the government's lying. I'm just saying that, once we get the settlement and we know exactly that the funding is in place, I'm just putting that caveat there at this time of immense fiscal pressure on the government. But certainly politically, there is no suggestion that the Uplift won't continue. But one of the important things as we go through this Uplift is that it's not just the costs of having police officers. There's associated costs with it, some of which should be included in the funding settlement, but we also continue to have significant fiscal pressures, which will be detailed at subsequent police and crime panel meetings when it comes to looking at the medium-term outlook. And it's going to there will have to be some fairly challenging decisions made by the force to balance the books. Moving on through the report, again, some really good innovation there with alcohol interlocks that we've been driving, and indeed the issues around rural crime. Just worth mentioning that since this report was written and published, we've done really, really well from a rural crime perspective. Independent analysis done by the National Farmers Union showed that, in fact, Durham and the levels of rural crime are bucking the trend, particularly in the northeast, which is really good. Ron made it a priority in his police and crime plan, and I've continued to drive that. So you'll see at the end of the report, there's a summary of the work that we've been doing. At the top of that is around, and I go back to what I said in my presentation around the media, around engagement at this difficult time. You'll recall that at the start of the year, we engaged an organisation called Elucid to improve our engagement around the precept, and that has continued throughout the year. And that continues to give us very interesting data in terms of what the priorities are for the people of Durham and Darlington. And in fact, that continues to be the single biggest issue that is raised through that system, is concerns around roads policing and issues relating to road safety, which I think is an interesting one. And just on that point, there is a recent thematic inspection by Hmic Frs nationally in relation to roads policing, I think it's fair to say, I mean, I'm a former roads policing officer, and certainly at the start of austerity, when police forces were faced with cutting budgets drastically, it has to be said that roads policing was a victim of that in terms of capacity. I think that the tide is turning and there is a greater recognition now in relation to roads policing. It remains a priority in relation to the police and crime plan. And in fact, we've done quite a lot of innovation and investment in relation to further safety camera work that I commissioned, which is now operational. And that chimes, my point is that chimes with what people are telling us in terms of being a priority. So I think that, as I say, the report should speak for itself. There's links on there if people want more detail, but I think it's a professional, succinct document that if people want to know, what's happening in the world of the PCVC office, it gives a fairly accurate and succinct summary, and happy to take questions.
Any members have any questions for the Acting Commissioner? No. Nobody's indicated. Very detailed report. I think you've covered quite a lot there within the report, Steve. So can we agree the report? Thank you. We move on to item 7, which is the quality performance report. And I think we have James with us this morning to present that report.
Thank you, Chair. So I think everyone's familiar with the format of this report, so I'll just go through the most common points. The report
Seems to be a problem with your mic, James. We can't quite hear you.
is that hello?
Councillor Hovels, you're on mute still.
Is it me that's struggling to hear what James is saying, or is other people having the same problem?
Yeah, I am too, Chair.
Right. Okay. People are struggling just with your mic, James.
Can you hear now? No.
It's very distorted, really. So.
Chair, could I invite Sharon Cadell to present it with the difficulties that we're having with James's sound?
Okay, Sharon, are you happy to pick it up?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair. And if I might suggest, James, if you want to exit the meeting and then rejoin, you might find that that sound quality is better on your mic. I don't know if you want to give that a go. Thank you, Chair. So just stepping into the frame in relation to this item. So you will see that the last performance report that we presented to the panel was focused on the key performance questions 1 to 4, and this report deals with questions 5 to 8 on this occasion, which are detailed in the box on page 1 there. Communities are safe and crime is reduced. Victims and the vulnerable feel supported, reoffending is reduced, rehabilitation is improved. And finally, question 8, which is people have confidence in the police and criminal justice system. Of course, all of these questions emanate directly from the Police Crime and Victims Plan that was set in 2017 and which remains the current Police and Crime Plan. So in terms of reducing reoffending, you will see from the graphs below that, and I won't speak to the whole of the report, that in relation to published data around the percentage of offenders who reoffend, there is an upward trend in relation to that, but that they still remain relatively lower when the historical context is considered there. Actual numbers of offences committed per reoffender seems to be increasing, which speaks to a particular cohort of people who are typically involved in criminal activity and so on. So the highest levels of reoffending relate to theft areas in our area, but certainly there has been an increase in less violent, serious offences. So moving on to key performance question 6, in terms of rehabilitating people who have offended, I think that the panel will probably be aware from previous updates that the Local Criminal Justice Partnership, the LCJP, which is a collaborative board which sits across both Cleveland and Durham, and that realises many benefits in terms of we have the same judicial footprint, certainly the same probation footprint as well. So that certainly realises many collaborative opportunities in terms of bringing those people together involved in the whole criminal justice system. So the group has objectives as detailed on page 3 there, pathways to desistance. That is the how we can support offenders not to offend in future by looking at their criminogenic needs, really getting into the detail around the performance framework review, whole systems approach to female offenders as well. Now, female offenders are known within the criminal justice system to be in the minority and to be particularly vulnerable in relation to their life cost circumstances. So particular approaches that are not necessarily applicable to the whole offending population. Research has very much found that female offending benefits from quite a specific approach there. Finances, when I talked about criminogenic need there, that very much speaks to the contributing factors to offending and so on, as does offender journey. Again, similarly, that's in relation to life course issues, and then diversionary interventions, which is a huge area of evidence-based growth within policing, certainly within the whole of the criminal justice system, about really early interventions actually proving extremely valuable in terms of preventing future demand upon criminal justice system and all the agencies associated with it. And I think partners will be aware, for instance, that we have a number of such schemes available that we work in conjunction with partners on in County Durham and Darlington, not least Rough Sleeper Initiative, Rapid Rehousing Pathways, Tenancy Sustainment Officer, and Project Beta, the partnership between the prison, the County Council, the Community Rehabilitation Company, which looks at high-risk offenders and really tries to navigate a pathway for them into stable accommodation by developing really good and close working relationship with landlords, etc. Additionally, part of the work that we do extends to family work with NEPACs, and you know, we give particular attention to again on an evidence-based basis those prolific young offenders who again form a small cohort who are responsible for some of the largest demands upon policing time and response and so on, and again that extends to all of the criminal justice partners as well. So a higher reoffending rate had been expected for that group, but what was experienced was a low reoffending rate after 6 months, and after April 19, that we saw a decline again. So that has been the lowest number of interest that County Durham Youth Offending Service has seen since they began to track that group. A similar picture in Darlington, there are low numbers there, but an overall decrease in reoffending across that caseload. which I think speaks to some success of the interventions that are being used. Hopefully partners are aware of the integrated offender management approach, which again brings together criminal justice partner agencies and provides a fully coordinated operational delivery plan, very targeted towards individual offenders who are causing particular problem issues, and really tries to get underneath, again, its criminogenic need, and is very much a case of getting on the back of those offenders as well, in a supportive way, primarily, but absolutely looking at enforcement measures where needed too. You will see on page 5 a significant decline has been achieved with the proportion of the IOM cohort, but that has started to increase again at the beginning of this year, which is an area of concern. And in terms of work done by our office, we do, so Steve is chair of the local criminal justice partnership board, and that is an area of action actively being taken forward through that forum and through working subgroups as well to that partnership, just you know, really trying to understand that. Steve mentioned separately in his annual report update around Checkpoint, the preventative programme supporting distance pathways, and it's fair to say, and I'm sure it's been noted in previous panels, that has been a particularly successful programme, and it's now well embedded, business as usual in Checkpoint. Now, Checkpoint is primarily focused on low to medium risk offenders in Darlington County Durham, very much seeks to defer prosecutions, defer criminalisation of individuals by diverting them away from the criminal justice system. That doesn't mean it's light touch by any stretch of the imagination. It is that there are quite a lot of requirements around the Checkpoint programme, which really seek to again, for want of a better phrase, get on the back of those potential offenders and address the reasons why they are offending. So very, very close monitoring, and a lot of support resources are put in, and a very close eye is kept upon enforcement. Clearly, if that doesn't work for them, then they are very much taken through enforcement routes as well. It's absolutely an evidence-based approach, which, as Steve mentioned, won the Goldstein Award in terms of the value that it offers for policing and for society as a whole. It certainly reduces reoffending, certainly reduces the costs associated with repeat demand that those offenders might have otherwise had within across the whole of the criminal justice system in future years. So you will see there prevalence of reoffending was 36.6 compared to 46.9. Now that is in scientific terms highly statistically significant. So it's got a very, very powerful impact in terms of the treatment that's given through Checkpoint and so on. So at the bottom of page 6 there, it details figures associated with the randomised control trial there, which I won't linger over. And you will see also that it has gained quite a lot of international attention, certainly been visitors to the force from far and wide, UK, Australia, America, as far as I understand. And it's a model that I know is being promoted through Cambridge University as well, through other democratic policing systems. I've talked about the needs of offenders, female offenders, which we can see in paragraph 25, and you will see the specific provision in place through the enhanced Through the Gate programme, designed to provide support for women in custody. We also have the Restorative Hub, which is intended, designed for victims who might benefit from a restorative intervention. Again, this is one that is well supported by science too, in terms of victims getting, if you like, closure from the experience that they've had by being able to set out their experiences and how it made them feel in a very safe, mediated way. So it's proven to be very successful, and that continues to be an active intervention used within County Durham and Darlington. Does have a profound effect on offenders who engage with the process there. So you can see across the years in the table at the bottom of 7, just the kind of pattern in terms of reoffending and so on there, and the referrals that dealt with as well. Okay.
Sorry, Sharon.
It's okay. It's okay. Just very quickly to mention alcohol interlocks as well, and alcohol sobriety tags. Both initiatives supported by Home Office and universities too, around just providing really robust interventions with offenders who have alcohol related problems as well, that are contributory to their offending. So moving on to performance, question 7 then, around confidence in criminal justice system. And there's a lot of analysis carried out by the force on this and through the local criminal justice partnership. We do use the crime survey for England and Wales. It is a good weather vane in terms of direction of travel, with people's confidence in the system. And the page 8 describes some of the objectives that the local criminal justice partnership are tasked with around increasing confidence there, and that there is a subgroup. We do have an analyst in our office, Rebecca Spain, and regularly monitor data around that. It's been particularly helpful during the COVID operating model, and the impact upon court closures as well. So I think which will be common knowledge at the start of the lockdown period. It's not detailed in the table here, but as an addition, at the start of the lockdown period, we saw a great deal of confidence and public compliance. That has varied since then, with the changing restrictions that have been issued since then. Nevertheless, policing broadly enjoys, policing in Durham and Darlington broadly enjoys quite a lot of confidence from the public and the communities it serves. So that moves us on to page 9, and you will see some statistics associated with that, and that there has been no change in some of those indicators. We have dropped in some of the other indicators areas, concerns and confidence, and we have risen in terms of how good a job that the public think we are doing as well. All of those, certainly our office and the force, don't sit on the information. That's feedback that is constantly used and fed into processes, and very much informs operational policing, and certainly informs the engagement of our office with victims and communities as well. I think so. Top of page 10 describes some of the partnership working and some of the particular initiatives around officers being trained in the competence, academy training, park and walk, park and talk, which is very much focused on getting feet on the ground in local neighbourhoods and improving visibility, because that matters as much as the responses. Ideally, what we want is an absence of crime, but particularly in those areas that do suffer from high instances of crime, public safety and antisocial behaviour, that really matters. It's an opportunity to detect and prevent crime, and is shown to work very well. The policing and communities partnership meetings, forums are still in operation, and they agree neighbourhood priorities. Again, working very well. They have been informative in terms of just allowing that feedback from communities and from local stakeholders as well. And it's fair to say that our office has very much handled some of those messages directly across to police in terms of what communities want to see, what concerns they're raising, and just really teasing out what's being done and whether anything additionally can be done as well. Okay, so if I might move on then. Sorry, and just to say, you know, other ways of engagement are detailed there: social media, newsletters, etc. Keeping the note are just a few of the ways that the messages are really pushed out to try and help people understand what is being done in their communities in relation to policing and victim support services as well. The independent custody visitor system is a statutory provision, and that remains in place to check on the welfare and treatment. It was suspended across the majority of forces at the beginning of the COVID health protection restrictions, and however, we're really happy to say that in Durham we have managed quite successfully to get that up and running, with safeguarding in place for the volunteers involved in that provision. So we currently have 25 independent custody visitors. All are doing an excellent job, and all highly responsive as well, in relation to observing the human rights requirements around detained offenders and so on. That is very much worked in partnership with between the OPCVC, our office, and the force, via custody management as well. Okay, so I think I would say, just to conclude by saying that a lot of work has gone on in our office. It's unfortunate that James hasn't been able to speak to this, but the benefit of it is I can give him credit for the vast amount of work that he has done on revising the whole accountability framework. So really keeping a close eye on the not just the work of the force, but the value of that. We have a role, as people will be very familiar with, in scrutiny and accountability and public confidence as well. And we now have a really sophisticated accountability framework, which is owned at executive board level, so by all the statutory officers and by all the leaders of the force as well. So those who can really ensure that the findings of that and the feedback and the actions of that properly grip throughout the force and feed their way down right across to the front lines and so on. We have scrutiny panels under our remit. A lot of work has gone on to that. You know, we look at things like domestic abuse, rape scrutiny, stop and search, use of force, interventions against the community as well. So you know, that's working very well. Naturally, within those processes, what has started to come, the feature has been just really understanding COVID-19 as an operating model and ensuring that we carry out our scrutiny duties safely and effectively. And we are very much moving towards hosting those online. And making sure we're GDPR compliant with that. The benefit of all of this work is it really gathers up the work that really is done by our office, really focuses on the work of the force, using up the benefits of it, but also some areas for improvement. Absolutely provides greater transparency as well. And you know, the absolute ambition of that is to increase public's confidence in Durham and Durham Constabulary. So I will conclude there, Chair, if I might, by asking panel to note the contents of the report and seek any relevant points of clarification.
Thank you, Sharon. I have Councillor David Boyce indicated he would want to be asking a question. Councillor Boyce?
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Right. Okay, yeah, I'm really concerned about this report, and there's a link, as far as I can see, between the number of offenders who are like re-offending and the fact that nearly 50%, nearly half of our residents don't seem to have confidence in the police and the council for like dealing with the crime and antisocial behaviour issues that matter in this area. I'm just want to ask, is this an acceptance now with the number of diversionary measures that we've got? We've got checkpoints, we've got like out of court disposals, that we've now reached a hardcore of individuals who, whatever diversionary measures we try and like impose, it's not going to work with these people. I think that we've got the lower level through where we could sort of deal with some people, but we've got now to a hardcore who just committing crime with impunity. I did just on a personal basis, I did a walkabout in a part of Easington, and I was accosted by an angry crowd of people who lived down the B streets in Easington Colliery, and one person in one street said in 1 week that had 2 cars set alight, people were openly dealing drugs in the street, unconcerned whatsoever about council or the police coming along. They were just openly dealing drugs. There was fights in the street, and there were okay, if I can just quickly summarise what I've said so far. I was concerned about hard to reach groups. I think we've sort of used the diversionary measures that we can do, and I think it has been a success in getting certain groups not to discontinue the the offences that they have been committing. But I think that we have got a hard core of groups that whatever diversionary measures that we try and impose, it just doesn't seem to be working. They're causing crime, antisocial behaviour with impunity. I mentioned about a walkabout where I was accosted by a number of angry individuals and residents who are really concerned that they're being left behind. The fact we haven't had a pact meeting since February, I don't think has helped, because these people would generally come to the pact meeting and let us know individuals what's going on. Obviously, we haven't been able to have meetings in public since February, so I think a lot of these people feel left behind. And there's just one more point, if I may, Chair, and that's with regards to checkpoint. Now, a couple of years ago, I think a number of points were added to checkpoint. One was assault to a police officer. So apparently, if somebody can assault a police officer and they sign a form, and then within a few months they can make sure that it's been impinged or whatever. Has any other points been added or taken from the criteria for checkpoint? Because I know there was a number of panel members were concerned that there was items added to the checkpoint criteria which weren't necessarily medium or low risk offences. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Boyce. Chair, are you okay for me to respond?
Yeah, if you could.
Yeah. I know that
Yeah.
Councillor Dalston has a question as well. Okay.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So some of this, Councillor Boyce, I think it would be fair to say I need to refer to the force in order to get a specific response to the issues that you've raised in relation to Easington Colliery, public confidence and so on. And the pact meeting particularly. So that is something that our office will take away and ask for a specific response to be provided on that. Yes, in relation to the hardcore of offenders who potentially have a mindset that they can offend with impunity. Undoubtedly, there are offenders out there who are very much in that vein, and from what we see, there's you know, and we are privy to high-level information on major policing operations within the office. From what we see, there's a lot of concerted effort that goes into the response to those matters. And I certainly know that Easington has been one of the districts that has received regular attention due to issues there. Thank you very much for advising us in relation to the matter of the visible drug dealing. That's extremely helpful, intelligent, and I know that the force will value it. I hope I described to you a very robust feedback system around the issues that are made aware, that communities feedback to the force, and the active work that they do to get on top of those issues. But clearly, the force aren't necessarily cited on everything, and that's where, you know, there's huge benefit to you know, the breadth of the community and representatives such as yourself, Councillor Boyes, in bringing those matters to the attention of our office and the force itself as well, to ensure that those are prioritised for actions within the work of the force. In relation to Checkpoint, I wasn't aware that assaulted police officers had been added to that, and I would have to ask the force as to whether that remains one of the eligible offences. I suspect it is already in the process of being reviewed, because we have had such a changed environment in recent months, and we know that we've seen a lot of assaults against police officers which have received, rightly so, received a lot of attention and a lot of condemnation as well. So I think if I might refer that back to the force, and I'm happy to bring those responses back formally to the Police and Crime Panel.
Thank you, Sharon. I've got Derek and Steve, you've indicated, do you want to come in at the end, or is it in relation to what Sharon's just said?
Well, it was in response to David, really.
David.
So
right, okay.
Whenever you want.
Okay, I'll come back to you, Steve. I'll take Derek and then Jonathan, and then I'll bring you in, Steve. Derek?
Thank you, Chair. Derek Dodwell, independent member of the panel. Almost every other day I get something email with regard to cybercrime. And are you keeping any records of how significant the increase in offending and reoffending of cybercrime during this coronavirus lockdown period? Because it seems a lot of very vulnerable people are being targeted with money scams and the like, and I'm just wondering what is happening with regard to monitoring that activity.
Thank you, Councillor Dodwell. The short answer is yes. The force, particularly, our role is monitoring of the force's activity, but the force, we are aware through the reports that they make to us that there has been an increase, and that picture is similar across all force areas, by the way, and very much a key priority within the National Police Chiefs Council as well, the growth of cybercrime and preying on the vulnerable as well, and absolutely that you know, it's completely unpalatable, but that has been very much an area that's been exploited during the lockdown period, people's isolation, people's poor mental health and so on. So, you know, some very, very predatory offenders out there. Yes, the force are very aware of this. It's a massive growing area, and features in the College of Policing's future operating environment model as well. They recognise huge growth in that. So it's become, I think, quite a significant proportion of crime is being committed online as opposed to physically and so on. So yes, in short.
Okay.
Sorry, just to sum up from that, is there any likelihood that, say, the police might be able to publicise some telephone number or contact number where individuals can check to see whether some of these scams are genuine or not genuine?
I shall look into that, if I may, Councillor Dodwell. I get a response. If I think, given the urgency of your question, it's really important that we get that back to you as soon as possible as well.
Thank you.
And I think there's some joint work goes on, Derek, with the trading standards and the people from the county council with the police in particular around some of them issues that you raised. Thanks for raising that. I've got Jonathan, who put his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think really just to echo what Councillor Boyes has said, I think there's been a massive impact made with regards to the education the force does, but also the out-of-court dispersals and the out-of-court initiatives that go on. But I think we're at a time now where people are looking for the police to become the real enforcer of the community. And I do think that Durham has probably lost its way in terms of its policing approach with regards to having that tough approach on the people who are continuing to blight our communities. It's quite interesting in how we've managed the pandemic, and I know I've shared this with you previously, Steve. The forces chose to go down the education route heavily. You know, they're putting social media posts on praising people for following the rules. Well, the reality is there's a small population who aren't following the rules, and people are looking in our communities for the police to take a tough approach. And unfortunately, from where I see it, that approach just isn't happening. People are wanting used to deal with these people who are putting businesses at risk, and it just feels like the police is losing its way in terms of being an enforcer and putting a massive emphasis on being an educator. The rest of us in the community, whether that's the council or other organisations, are doing a big piece of work on the education, but we are crying out for the police to play their part, and that is the enforcement. And only when we do all of the E's together will we actually deal with the issues that are in front of us. It's more of a comment, really.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'll bring Steve in. And I know you have been into East Durham, Steve, very recently, so I think it's linking to David's question. I know you've been to Horden, which borders Easington.
Yeah, I just want to. It's important that we don't conflate the two separate issues here, referring to what Jonathan has just said, which primarily. There's a clear link around enforcement around the public health issues that we've got at the moment. That's a bit of a separate issue. It's something that I might be able to talk about a little bit later. Although I would say that I think that the approach that the force has taken in relation to the regulations and enforcement has been the correct one and continues to be so. Then we've got the issue that David has described, which, let's be brutally frank, is nothing to do with COVID. It's to do with criminals, antisocial behaviour, and crime and drug dealing. You know, the single biggest important message really here for me, and it's very difficult to comment on individual circumstances without being able to go into the detail. And I know Sharon will have a look at that detail. But the single biggest piece of work that I think my office needs to ensure is that people report things to us. And I am still concerned, and I saw this in Horden definitely, is that there is in some parts of the force area a feeling of apathy in that what's the point? What's the point in trying to contact the police? What's the point in telling them? Well, I would say there's every point in telling us. So, for example, the open drug dealing that goes on, the number of times that I've been told, you know, third hand, people have said there's open drug dealing going on. and not wishing to sound flippant, but my response would be, well, have you reported the open drug dealing going on? I accept that, you know, it does happen in terms of the reporting, but perhaps not to the extent that it needs to. I'm confident that the force is responsive in such a way that, you know, these are not reports that can be forgotten about when the force know about them. And I would be confident that the force does respond appropriately when they get the information. Now, we've got to balance that with the ability of the force with current resource to be able to do that. But of course, policing is only one part of the issue around offending and re-offending, and this is important. It now goes on to the checkpoint scenario. One of the drivers behind checkpoint is exactly to deal with things relatively quickly, and don't even get me started on the issues that we've currently got in relation to backlogs in courts and the criminal justice system as a whole because of COVID. But to deal with things quickly and to try and ensure that it doesn't happen again. You're absolutely right. If there are repeat offenders, I can assure you, being an ex-officer myself, there is nothing that irritates the police service more than the same people being arrested for the same thing, and knowing that when they're dealt with through the system that it's going to happen again. So I want to give some assurance that that is something that the force will take seriously, and there's absolutely no point, and there's robust governance in place in continuing to put people through rehabilitation schemes if it's having no effect. But of course, then we look to our wider partner agencies in terms of that being effective, whether it be the magistrates court, whether it be sentencing, whether it be probation, whether it be social services. And that's where it's very important for my office to make sure that there are those links. I absolutely get some of the frustration that there is in our communities, and I think that frustration has definitely been exacerbated by COVID. You know, it's a challenge. It's a frustration for me that I can't go to you know, the local meetings and have the conversations and then take the issues back to the force, because that's part of my role and it's hugely frustrating. And we can't just rely on social media, I know, and so it's important that we do get this feedback from councillors. But I do want to defend the force a bit here, in that if there are issues of the nature of which you described, David, I would be surprised and very disappointed if they hadn't been dealt with appropriately within the bounds of what the force is able to do, certainly in terms of evidence. And certainly when it comes to the drug dealing, you know, this is very high on the national agenda, although interestingly, it's second and third on the list of people's priorities from the samples that we've got through Elucid, in fact. It varies across the county, as you would expect in Easington, and perhaps in the east of the county it's greater, and that's not surprising. But you know, policing is there to kick in doors and nick people who are doing things they shouldn't be doing, to be brutally frank, and we rely on the intelligence from the local communities. So the key thing here is around trust and confidence, and when it comes to policing COVID, this is where there is a very close link. And it's always been my view, and that of the chief constables, that we've got to maintain that level of confidence, because if we don't, people aren't going to report things to us, which means we can't do anything about it. Without that trust and confidence, you know, it makes life very, very difficult. And so this is where it's absolutely key for us to get that balance right and to listen to people. I was hoping that, you know, as things were progressing over the summer, that we were going to be able to come back to an element of normalcy so that we could engage with some of this stuff. It now looks as though we are going backwards somewhat. And it's going to be very difficult over the next 6 months. Of that, there is absolutely no doubt. And, you know, I will certainly take away from this meeting, and well, we've been thinking about it anyway, about how we can better engage with people and be that bridge between communities and the force on occasions. So in summary, it's a plea that when you do encounter, you know, the angry residents, and I do totally understand it, that we've got to keep driving that message that you must, you know, when you see the open drug dealing going on, when you know that it's so-and-so who's committing these crimes, pick up the phone, send a text, go online, let us know. Then if we find that the force aren't responding to those things, it's something tangible that I can do something about. I don't believe that it will happen, that there won't be a response. I believe there will be a response, and that the force will appropriately respond. But it's a collective responsibility to try and get our communities to have that trust and confidence going forward. And again, just reflecting on Jonathan's comments, this is why it is so vitally important that that people have trust and confidence in our approach to policing in general, that there's consistency, that there's trust and confidence. And also, I've got to be honest, I don't like the word enforcement. I don't like this sort of analogy between, we're the police and we're there to enforce things. We're there to work with people, and we're there to take people into the criminal justice system if they're shown to have transgressed the line, and that is entirely appropriate. But we're not, it's not the strong arm of the law. I'm not entirely convinced that will help. But having said that, if we need to, and the force has demonstrated, certainly in the East End of the county, in terms of the number of proactive operations that there's been, particularly in relation to drug dealing, they'll go and kick in doors and they'll nick people, and entirely appropriate.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Boyce, you did indicate to come back in, so I will take you, and then I'll try and move us on. Councillor Boyce, you haven't got your mic on, David.
Okay, sorry. Just quickly, Steve, when I am talking to residents, there's three main reasons people don't get in touch with the police. One is, as you say, what's the point? Nothing's ever going to get done, and we try and still at least it gets on the database, so if nothing's done that particular day or that particular week, at least it's recorded. Two, people say they have tried to phone the police and they can be on 20-25 minutes trying to get through the 101 number. Now, do we have a KPI that would suggest that should be getting down a little bit, because people do get frustrated when they're on the phone and then they get the stupid message, please stay on the line, your call is important to us. Well, if you're there for 20-25 minutes or so, it can get really, really frustrating. And third is, if they do actually get through, they're seen as grasses within the particular community, and then they're worried about reprisal attacks. I've had people phone me to see if I will phone the police on their behalf, and then I've got to go through the rigmarole of being waiting 20-25 minutes. So those are the three main reasons that I get, where people say, well, what's the point? We don't get through anywhere, and they are really concerned about reprisal attacks from said individuals who are causing this crime with impunity. And as I say, there's people now within our communities who think they're untouchable. And that's the concern I've got as a ward councillor and the local police have. They think that they can get away with anything they want to now because nothing's going to happen. Okay, thanks for that rant over, Chair.
No, that's good. It's created a lot of discussion, a lot of debate around that, Dave, and it's quite healthy to have these conversations. And I'm sure with Steve and Sharon, they'll be taking them back and looking at them and come back with some of the concerns you've addressed. I'll take Councillor Dunstan, and then I'll bring Sharon in, and then I'll close it off and move the agenda on. It's just you had indicated and your hands had gone up. So, Jonathan, if I come to you first. You need your mic on, Jonathan.
No, just to sort of re-emphasise the point that I don't use the word enforcement lightly, but, talking to residents, it's clear that they want their police force to return back to the basics of becoming an enforcer. And that is certainly what I'm hearing at the moment. And I understand all of the partnership work and all of that's great in these forums, but you know what? It doesn't resonate with people on the street anymore. They are losing credibility in the police service, in their approach to dealing with those who continue to blight. Out of court disposals and all of these initiatives aren't washing anymore, and that is what the consensus is of certainly what I'm hearing. So, I repeat the point again, and I don't use the word enforcement lightly, but that, I think, in essence, what I'm trying to say is people are wanting the police to go back to basics.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I've come to Sharon.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just to assure councillors, that we will feed these matters back to the force, but we can't answer questions on operational policing. That is absolutely the responsibility of the force themselves, which is why it's important that councillors make that direct link. And we are absolutely happy to transmit those messages. But I just wanted to reiterate that point, that the force are ready and willing, from everything that our office observes. They are ready and willing to receive that information and to act upon it as well. The second thing, Chair, if I might just mention, is that we have just as of last week concluded a visit from Her Majesty's Inspectorate Constabulary Fire and Rescue Service as well, which was went right into the detail of the COVID-19 policing response and looked at the effectiveness, efficiency and legitimacy of the policing response as well. So I think we should have an interim report available in time for the next panel. I'm hopeful of that. So if that happens, I can certainly liaise with the Secretariat and ensure that that is included on the agenda. And I think again that will give the panel members present some real detail on what we know is a very robust rake through what it is that policing have been concerned with and whether that presents value and the public confidence that stems from those actions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, really helpful, Sharon. Thank you. Can we note the contents within the report, please? Members agree, thank you. Moves us on to item 8, which is the commissioning update. I believe Charles will present this report.
Good afternoon, or sorry, good morning. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is not quite as interesting as the last couple of reports, but we set out the decisions taken at the commissioning board to represent allocations of finance. So I'm quite happy to take any questions on any of the decisions that were there. The report speaks for itself.
Does any member have any questions or queries they want to ask Charles? Nobody's indicated. Are we happy to agree the report? Nobody? Okay. We agree with the report. That's very quick. Thank you.
That is quick.
Moves us on to item 9, which is the PCVC decisions records.
That's me again. They're set out, and again, I'm happy.
I think it's myself actually, Charles.
Yeah. I was going to say, I've got.
I'm on the agenda for this.
Yeah, I'm going to say I've actually got Steve down on the agenda for it.
I was going to say I was going to fight you for it.
Yeah, I've got your name attached to it, Steve, so I'm coming to you.
Yeah, that's fine, because after all, they are apparently my decisions. So I'll quickly mention a couple of points. Yeah, according to this, I've been pretty busy actually. I've been making all sorts of decisions, which is deeply concerning. But I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of things, particularly given the amount of time that has passed since our last meeting, and in particular, and this is related to other issues. I mean, the decisions themselves, they're pretty obvious in terms of those decisions that I've taken. But decision 18 of 2020 is something I wanted to draw your attention to, because this is going to be impactive, very impactive on the whole of the force and its budget and its financial planning, and indeed operational capability going forward. This is in response to an agreement by me around it's now purchase and development of a site for a centralised custody facility for the force. So I want to talk very briefly in relation to that. Hmic FRS, as I do believe I've briefed the board before, or the panel before, did an unannounced inspection into force custody last year, and as a result of that, there were a number of recommendations, which has meant that the force has been working very hard to determine how to respond to it. We have a large policing estate across the force with many custody facilities. Custody has changed beyond all recognition in my 32 years of police service, and certainly the rules, the health and safety considerations have changed dramatically as well. The force has an ageing estate, and that particularly applies to custody centres. And the most cost-effective way to deal with some of the issues that relate to the fabric of custody suites are going to be, can only really be addressed by the creation of a new custody centre. The force simply can't afford more than one, and so it's determined that a centralised custody facility will be built, which will be the single largest, biggest investment in the history of the force, because these things don't come cheap. You can't buy custody facilities off the shelf, so to speak. So they are bespoke and they are heavily regulated, which adds a certain amount of cost to it. Over the summer, and certainly since early spring, late winter, early spring, I have been pressing the case to the force of the need for a joined up strategy concerning estate across the force, particularly at a critical time when we're considering spending a significant amount of public money in the creation of the central custody facility. And in response to that, the force has created an estate strategy, which contains an action plan, which in short is a review of the whole of the policing estate in terms of operational needs, in terms of affordability, costs. But there are a number of headlines to bear in mind, particularly the approach that the force has taken through a period of austerity to maintain officer numbers, which has meant that other parts of the force has perhaps suffered a little, and that certainly is true for the estate. We have a fairly significant backlog in relation to backlog maintenance that you can only sort of not do for a certain amount of time, and we've got to a critical stage really across the force with the estate, which means that the investment that is going to be made in relation to the central custody facility, and there's a couple of other areas that will be based there as well, makes it very prudent for the force to review its estate. Now, of course, along comes COVID, and it changes an awful lot of how we use our estate. To a certain extent, that's an opportunity for the force in terms of looking at innovative and modern ways of working, which clearly impacts on the estate. And the connection here is also with police ICT, the force ICT. And in fact, at the executive board last week, the force presented its ICT strategy, which is very good, very comprehensive, and links very clearly with the estate strategy. So those two pieces of work going forward are going to be something that is going to preoccupy us for the next couple of years, because they're the two single biggest areas of cost to the force. And it's important that in terms of my current responsibilities acting PCVC, I ensure the very best bang for the public buck going forwards. I suspect that there may be a couple of questions, and I just wanted to check that Gary Ridley is online. I do believe he is, because he's all things money, and indeed is heavily involved in the development in relation to the custody facility and estate. We were working very closely with Gary, but I'm happy to take a couple of questions in relation to that.
Councillor Jones has a question, Steve. Ask Councillor Jones to ask his question.
Sure.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Steve, the estate review which has been carried out by the force, will that be made available for members to study, please?
There's a number of commercial sensitivities in the strategy itself, because it details locations in terms of development potential, but I'm going to defer to Gary in terms of my instinct is to say yes, and in fact, just it's worth pointing out that in terms of the strategy that the force is going to take, you will have received the letter from me detailing what we're going to be doing, which also includes an offer of briefings to make sure that people are fully informed. But take your point, Brian. Gary, what's your response in relation to the publication of the strategy?
Yeah, happy to produce an abridged version, Councillor Jones. And I think when we have the briefing early next month, the content of the strategy is going to be articulated there. What I would stress, it's a multi-year document because the reprovisioning of custody is the turnkey decision that the PCVC's take, and that starts to unlock lots of other decisions within it. But yeah, happy to share an abridged version if that would help.
Yes, that would help greatly, Gary, because as you're aware, Steve.
Your mic's gone off, Brian. Brian, your microphone's not on.
That's better. It keeps going off. Right, sorry. Yeah, as I said, Steve, I do have serious concerns about this move, and the abridged document might help answer some of the questions, but I'd also appreciate a briefing with yourself to discuss my concerns about this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Any other members have any questions?
Sorry, I was just wanted to respond to Brian, if I may, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian, and I'm happy to brief and have conversations with anybody in relation to it and the concerns, particularly around the operational impact. And I know that is causing some angst, but I want to also provide some assurance that you know, a lot of thought and work has gone into what the force is proposing. And a lot of mitigation has been introduced into the plan to try and mitigate some of the concerns. But I will be absolutely honest, is it a perfect solution? The answer is no. Is it an affordable solution? Just about, but it's going to be really hard.
Thank you. And obviously, Steve, just picking up the briefings with the other kind of partners and the big players, if you like, across the patch, that's penciled in to happen soon.
Yeah, the briefing by the Chief Constable and I is going to be, I think it's early November. The dates will be circulated. There's going to be a limit to the number of people we can invite to that briefing, but that's only because of logistics. We will then have you will have a commitment from me that not just this panel will be briefed, but in terms of the respective councillors, and indeed we're looking at ways in which we can effectively consult further on down the line locally once we understand the potential impact locally for various parishes, for example. But we've got to do the groundwork first, and I want to just make sure that, you know, we're being open and transparent about this. We're not doing it behind the scenes. I think it's really important for people to understand where we are. I think it's really important at this juncture, in terms of dealing with COVID, going into what may or may not be a 3-year comprehensive spending review and funding settlement for the service. It's important that everybody really understands where we are in relation to that, which is why I wanted to have an early doors conversation with people, let them know the work that's going on, so that they're fully sighted on it.
Thank you. No other questions, Steve? Back to you.
Hopefully, the rest of the report is self-explanatory in terms of the decisions that I've been making. I mean, there's been a lot of activity, as you might imagine, and present the report to the panel.
Thank you. Can we note the contents of the report, please? Okay, thank you. Moves us on to item 10, which is the Hmic Frs Inspections, and I've got James down to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me all right?
Lovely and clear. Thanks, James.
Okay, right. The report details the 8 inspections which the PCC has been required to comment on since the last update that was given to the panel. So the first one is the joint inspection on evidence-led domestic abuse prosecutions. So this was a national report, and inspectors found that at all levels, the police and CPS had a clear recognition that domestic abuse was a priority area of work, and to achieving the best possible outcome for victims. Their consideration was also given to how to prosecute should the victim withdraw support, which in turn, this will lead to a much more in-depth investigation at the scene. And they were the primary findings from that report. It wasn't Durham focused, it was national only. So we'll move on to the Durham Child Protection Inspection. This inspection was part of the rolling programme of inspections on child protection. It was Durham centric, and there was a multitude of recommendations in this report. And the responses to that are published in the Section 55 response on the website. There were about 27 recommendations, all of which were answered and evidenced by the force, by them personally and by us as well. So that comprehensive response is published on the website. The joint thematic inspection of integrated offender management. Inspectors found that the decision-making process was unclear at times, and there were also some issues around inspected plans. The report called for greater national leadership to ensure proper oversight of the programme. But for Durham, however, this isn't reflective. The force and the Office of the Police Crime Victims Commissioner have focused on integrated offender management heavily. And there's a lot of work gone on around that specific area of work to ensure that we are doing the best we can in Durham. Moving on to the next inspection, which is the police's contribution to the government's Prevent programme. This inspection is part of the HMIC's counter-terrorism inspection programme. Inspectors found that forces in general were meeting their Prevent duty and were working effectively with other organisations. The State of Policing Annual Assessment examines the efficiency and effectiveness of policing in England and Wales. This was a summative report. The findings of the report, one of the notable things in this was findings in relation to COVID-19, which was found that while there were some rare inconsistencies which surfaced in application of COVID-19 powers, they were eclipsed by commendable sensitivity and proportionality of officers towards their fellow citizens. And that's the direct assessment from them. And this was done through explanation and encouragement well before enforcement, which was the line that was deemed to be the preferred option by HMIC and obviously by Durham Constabulary. The final report, the penultimate is the call handling and control rooms, a call for help. Some of the main findings from this report were inconsistencies in how forces manage complex calls without deploying officers, that many forces don't have effective systems in place to manage the risk and volume of work, with increased demand rates, and there were inconsistencies in how police respond to vulnerable people, and some forces do not offer trauma support for call handlers. This was again a national report, not Durham centric. A lot of these, well, the majority of these do not apply to Durham, as will be evidenced in the response to the COVID-19 inspection that has just taken place last week. Road policing inspection, again, this was not Durham centric, it was a national report. It was one of the first road policing reports that has been done by HMIC for many years. The main findings from that were there were some good initiatives, but often the effect of these was unclear due to lack of analysis and evaluation. When it was identified, good practice wasn't shared across forces in an effective manner. And this point actually is something which we're currently directly addressing right now with Steve as the regional road safety lead for the APCC. We're working on getting improved collaboration across the region. Support provided to National's road safety campaigns wasn't consistent, which then in turn adversely affected their effectiveness. Too often, the HMIC found that officers hadn't been given appropriate training to support and allow them to carry out a critical role. Again, this was a national report and there were general findings, and we can evidence where we are addressing these or have already addressed them in the past in Durham. The final one is the Hard Yards Peel Spotlight report. This was focused upon police collaboration. Some of the main findings from that were that too many collaborations don't have a clear purpose or objective. Some forces are not tracking the benefits of collaboration and fail to think beyond financial savings. Sometimes bureaucratic decision making has been undermining the effectiveness of many police collaborations, and some forces are failing to put people with the right skills in their collaborations and are not effectively sharing or learning. So again, that was a national report, and in Durham, things are addressed around those points. I think that's something else to comment on, is that, as always, we are confident that these are all being dealt with appropriately and with an aim to improve the methods of work and effectiveness and efficiency of Durham Constabulary. So where the force may operate differently on some recommendations or areas for action, that we are satisfied that there's a strong rationale behind doing so, which I think often in force is referred to as the Durham difference. Just to move us on to known inspectional schedule for the coming year and some provision for the year after is the police in response to COVID-19, which has just taken place last week, which Sharon and myself have alluded to previously. They're looking at a joint inspection of the investigation and prosecution of rape cases, which obviously has been really big on the national agenda at the moment, and indeed internally. A proposed investigation into the area of super complaints, and there's also been some initial scoping on potential thematic reports for the years 2021-22, which will potentially include issues of race and disproportionality. I'm happy to take any questions.
Steve, did you want to comment?
Yes, if I may. It's not a question for you, James, but I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that were covered in those HMIC inspections, and particularly in relation to call handling. This is something that David Boyes mentioned earlier in relation to hanging on the phone. I wanted to say that the force call handling capability has improved quite significantly. There was a significant issue with recruitment and resources in control room functionality. It's better than it was. Having said that, there's still more that needs to be done. Also, just to mention, as James said, I'm now the Rhodes Policing Regional Lead for the Apcc, which I think is in fact really useful, both in terms of my experience, but also because of the renewed drive and interest that there is around roads policing. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. And also, just whilst I've got the microphone, to say that from a national perspective, I'm also the regional lead now for specialist capabilities on the Apcc, and a reminder that as a board member of the police ICT company, which is really driving police investment in ICT, and it's vitally important. I just wanted to again emphasise the sort of reach of Durham and my office in terms of being involved in those programmes, which is really important. And finally, the HMIC FRS inspection that took place last week in relation to COVID, interestingly, whilst it was a generalised inspection across all forces, there were some forces where there was specific focus. Not all forces were, there was only a few, and we were chosen as one of those, particularly in relation to investigations. You can draw your own conclusions as to why that was, but all I would say is that the hot debrief gave a very positive picture in terms of what the inspectorate found in relation to Durham.
Thank you, Steve. Does any of the members have any questions? Nobody's indicated. Can we agree the two recommendations outlined within the report? Thank you. Moves us straight on to item 11, which is the Police and Crime Annual Report Work Programme. And Jonathan Sleed will take us through this morning.
Thank you, Chair. Jonathan Sleed, Orpheum Scrutiny Officer from Durham County Council. The report in item 11 of today's agenda details the panel's annual report and annual report from 2019-20 and work programme for 2020-21. The first part of the report is the annual report, which looks back to activity undertaken within the last year. That's attached in Appendix 2 and provides a narrative on the role of the Office of the PCVC, the panel, in terms of its roles and responsibilities, and also details our activity undertaken throughout the year, which has included 5 scheduled meetings, and we had 3 confirmation hearings during that time. The report also details panel development during this period, engagement, and also support for the panel. Chair, I was going to say, as the report has highlighted, last year was an unprecedented year. There was a lot of activity, and the sadness and the passing of Mr. Hogg, and the challenges of COVID brought towards the end of the year. And it's just highlighting that the report details how the panel met its responsibilities within the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act, and acknowledges the continued support from the Office of the PCVC too. The second part of the report contains the panel's work programme for 2021, which is attached in Appendix 3. This illustrates proposed activity for this year. And Chair, just to note that the work programme is to be flexible to manage the demand and capacity with the impact of COVID, but also look to accommodate consideration of additional items. So Chair, just briefly within that context, just to conclude, the report asks the panel to endorse the annual report as attached in Appendix 2 and agree the work programme for 2021 within Appendix 3.
Thank you, Jonathan. Can we agree the recommendations? Agreed. Okay, thank you. No questions for Jonathan. We'll move on to item 12, which is the review of the complaints procedure. And Camilla's with us this morning to present this report. Over to you, Camilla.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm Camilla Coulson-Patel, the Governance Solicitor and Clerk to today's panel meeting. I'm presenting item 12, which is a review of the complaints procedure shown at pages 71 through to 125 of your reports pack. The panel have 2 roles in relation to complaints handling, which are scrutinising and supporting the Commissioners on their oversight of the force complaints and the handling of the Chief Constable complaint, following reforms to the police complaints and disciplinary system, and a direct role in dealing with non-criminal complaints about the Commissioner. On the 30th of November 2012, the panel adopted the existing procedure, which is based on the model procedure shown at Appendix 2 of your pack, pages 77 through to 99. Since this time, there have been no substantive changes to the procedure which have required consideration by the panel. In July 2019, the Local Government Association issued guidance for police and crime panels, which included recognised good practice in complaints handling, which has developed over the years. An extract of the guidance is shown at Appendix 3 of your papers, pages 101 and 102. Whilst the existing procedure remains legally compliant, the guidance issued by the LGA brings the opportunity to reflect on best practice and forms the basis for the review of the existing procedure. The proposed update to the procedure for consideration by the panel today is shown at...
Just point of order. The pages you're referring to, Camilla, I haven't got them on iPad. We've just got 1 to 5.
Ah, right. Some members may be working off a laptop, so the page numbers, I hope Councillor Boyce you're able to see that through the appendix reference, but if you need me to go through them, if you have specific questions on specific appendices, I can go through that for you.
I'm just finding it difficult to like sort of follow which pages you're going to and from, so it's because I say I'm using the iPad and I've just got 1 to 5.
Right, I'm not sure, having not used the iPad device, whether there are any page numbers, but if there are specific documents, I'll continue to refer to it as the appendix. And Councillor Boyce, I hope you'll be able to see it as the appendices on your iPad device.
All right, David?
Right, I'll try and follow it, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Boyce, just before I go on, do you have a copy of the report there to hand so you can see the report?
Well, I've got a report, yes. It's just, as I say, I'm finding it difficult when you're going on a page of 120 odds. When I'm looking for 120 odd, I've only got 1 to 5. I've looked through the purpose of the report, the background, the changes to the procedure, and now I've got to go somewhere else to get to the appendix. It's just a bit confusing at the moment. Sorry, I've got to come out of that now to get to the appendix. So the appendix is not actually part of the report.
Ah, right. I'll see if the committee officer, Ian Croft, behind the scenes can work with you to make sure that that's accessible.
So which appendix are we up to? Sorry.
So it was Appendix 4, which is the revised procedure.
So we're on to the complaints procedure flowchart.
No, just before that, The
revised procedure.
Yes, that's the one.
Okay, sorry about that, Chair. Just
yeah, the link's online, David. I think Ian's been trying to help you with that, so you should have it. It's there somewhere.
Right, okay. I'm up to speed now. Sorry about that, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Camilla.
No, thank you, Councillor Boyce. You're right to raise it. I want all panel members to be able to have it in front of them as best as they can with the various devices that you've got before you. So, going back, the proposed update to the procedure is shown at Appendix 4. Generally, the updates to the procedure are as follows: to update the post holder roles and to ensure that this is consistent in its use throughout the document. To ensure that the updated procedure is accessible, to use clear and plain language where possible and avoid legalistic language, to include a process map to outline the process, which is shown at Appendix 5, page 125. That was the document that Councillor Boyce was just on a moment ago, and to remove any typographical errors and formatting issues. The revised procedure has been streamlined with key concepts and definitions remaining within the document to ensure legal compliance. It is hoped that the updated procedure will give greater clarity on complaints handling, the role and remit of the panel in considering complaints, and the expected timescales for complaints handling. In addition to considering the revised procedure, members are invited to consider whether the vexatious and habitual complaints procedure, which appears at Annex 2 of the procedure and is shown at pages 121, 123, and in particular Schedule A 9, which reads, for the benefit of those who may not have it in front of them, where complainants are known to have recorded meetings or face-to-face or telephone conversations without prior knowledge and consent by the parties. This will be triggered as being considered as a vexatious or habitual complaint. A representation has been made to the clerk to the panel that this is a lawful activity and should be removed from the criteria in considering a complaint to be vexatious. It is not uncommon for authorities to have policies and procedures in place in relation to vexatious complainants. The application of this procedure for the treatment of vexatious and habitual complaints, I would like to inform members that complainants do have the right to respond or appeal, which is shown at paragraphs 2.2 of Annex 2, which sets out that the monitoring officer to the panel, in considering implementing the policy, the monitoring officer is required to give the complainant prior notification of its possible implementation, in that the complaint will be considered vexatious and rejected. There is also a requirement for the monitoring officer to seek agreement from the chair or vice chair to the panel when determining whether a complaint should be considered as vexatious. In accordance with paragraph 19 of the procedure, if a complainant is unhappy in the way that a complaint is being handled, which would include a determination that it has been considered vexatious, they do have a right of appeal to the local government ombudsman for consideration. Moving on, in addition to the revision to the policy, it is also recommended that a report be presented by the clerk at each regular meeting to report on any complaints which have been received which have not been presented to the panel. For example, those which fall outside of the criteria, and the monitoring officer to the PCVC and the clerk to the authority have delegated authority not to record those complaints. It is proposed that this report be brought to each regular meeting with a view to promoting transparency and ensure effective scrutiny of the overview of complaints by the panel. Chair, the recommendations within this report are the panel are asked to comment on the draft report, the draft update to the complaint procedure, to approve the draft complaints procedure to be implemented and applied to any complaints formally received after the 16th of October 2020, and to agree to accept a report from the clerk to the panel on complaints received at each regular meeting, including those which have not been referred to the panel. Thank you, Chair. That's the report, and I'll take any questions of members.
Thank you, Camilla. Does any members have any questions? Nobody's indicated, so can we agree the recommendations, please? Being formally moved, thank you. Takes us on now to item 13, any other business. I haven't been notified of any other business. Go to item 14, which is exclusion of press and public. At this point, can we agree the resolution to move into part B? Can somebody formally move and second that, please?
I'll move that, Chair.
Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that, Chair.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded, so that concludes the business for this public part of the meeting. And before the broadcast ends, can I like to thank those members of the public media who have watched this meeting, and could all members please ensure their microphones are muted until we have received confirmation that the live broadcast has ended, and then we'll move on to the private part of the meeting.